Hi, everyone. My name is David Bushman. I'm a television curator here at the museum. I don't want to take up a lot of time because we have a great program tonight, but I do want to thank all of you for coming out to support what, in my opinion, is the most sophisticated, intelligent, and compelling drama on television. And I want to thank HBO for, Diego and HBO for helping us put this night together, and all the cast and creative team for coming, and of course all of you. We also have a great moderator tonight who's the newly appointed film critic for New York Magazine. He won 2 national magazine awards at Entertainment Weekly, where he'd been television critic since the magazine's inception 15 years ago. Previously, he was TV critic for the Philadelphia Inquirer, where he was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 1985. He's also a weekly contributor to National Public Radio's Fresh Air with Terry Gross, and the author of the new book, Kissing Bill O'Reilly, Roasting Miss Piggy, 100 Things to Love and Hate About Television, and The Wire, I think, is one of those 100 to love. Please welcome Ken Tucker.
Thank you. The Wire is television's richest, most satisfying experience. No other series, yes. No other series offers the fundamental pleasures of genre fiction, the thriller, the police procedural, with equal attention given to issues of race, class, politics, and in the case of Jimmy McNulty, incorrigible loudishness. The Wire premiered in 2002 looking like it's not TV, it's HBO fare. Gritty, profane, occasionally violent, defiantly downbeat. But very quickly it became apparent that The Wire was its own creature. No other TV project, other than the miniseries The Corner, based on David Simon and Edward Burns' book, has come close to portraying the humanity of both the victims and the victimizers of crime. More crucially, The Wire has used the narrative form in a more radical manner than it's ever been deployed on television. It unfolds in long, discursive scenes with as much attention paid to mood and setting as character and plot, with the TV equivalent of an omniscient narrator. Its stately pace, which some have used to criticize the show and which has intimidated some viewers, is what so thrills the rest of us, because we are not subjected to variations on stock plot twists or violence used for shock or an explosive button at the end of an installment. The Wire has been heaped with raves and awards, and yet it always seems like half of its characters to be fighting for its life. To look at some websites of fans, I think its fans sometimes think that HBO is telling them to curb your enthusiasm. The ratings versus equality question is something I hope we'll get into later this evening. Enough praise. Please let me introduce David Simon.
Thank you. Rather than introduce everybody now, let's leave everything to the end and get through the episode as fast as we can. We're showing the first episode of season 3 because I thought it would be an interesting experiment. I imagine a lot of people here have seen the season or saw enough of it to know what happens. One of the things that happens every year, it seems, in the first 2 or 3 episodes, but particularly the first one, and it certainly happened the first year when we were, I guess the arrogant way to say it is I don't think we'd yet trained viewers to watch us, is that people watch the first episode and think, well, that was sort of interesting, but it didn't really go anywhere. And I'm not sure, it didn't move and nothing really happened. So I thought we'd all, with the interior knowledge we now have of what happened third season, rewatch the first episode and see if indeed nothing really happened. Because in our vanity, and it's one of the reasons that we have 250 telegram sending viewers, in our vanity, we really tried to write every year the visual equivalent of a novel. And if you think about any book you ever read in your whole life that you cared about, and you think about the first 2, 3 chapters, it often seems like nothing much happened. Not to compare The Wire to this book in any way, the book's better. But we've all read Moby Dick, it's the one I always like to cite this. You don't meet the whale, you don't go aboard the Pequod, you don't meet Ahab in the first chapters. You go to Bedford with Ishmael, and he has trouble getting a room at the inn, and he's got to share a bed with some, freak with tattoos and a harpoon. And that's pretty much what happens in the first couple of chapters. So the pacing is deliberate, but of course there was no way anybody trained on television or who'd supped at television could know that. So now we know that, and let's watch the episode with that in our heads.
Okay. Can I be heard? Okay. I'm going to fiddle with the microphone and make these introductions as quickly as possible. It's my pleasure to introduce the creator and executive producer of HBO's Peabody Award-winning drama, The Wire. He wrote the book Homicide: A Year on the Killing Streets, which served as the basis for the NBC TV series Homicide: Life on the Street. His 1997 book, co-authored with Ed Burns, The Corner: A Year in the Life of an Inner-City Neighborhood, was adapted for an Emmy-winning HBO miniseries. For his writing, he's won an Emmy, a WGA Award, and the Humanitas Prize. Like all good writers, he started out as a newspaper man, most notably for the Baltimore Sun. He once said that raw, unencumbered capitalism isn't a good thing for anyone, which, to my mind, makes him the most brilliant Marxist to run a TV show. Please welcome David Simon. Our next panelist is a crucial writer-producer for The Wire. He spent 20 years on the Baltimore Police Department, specializing in violent drug gangs, and was a teacher in the Baltimore public school system for 7 years. He co-authored with David Simon the book The Corner: A Year in the Life of an Inner-City Neighborhood, which became, it says here, an HBO miniseries. I would say the greatest HBO miniseries. Please welcome Ed Burns. Our next panelist is a writer-producer on The Wire. He's the author of 12 remarkable novels it's about crime and, may I add, the pleasures of R&B and soul and go-go music and P-Funk, set in and around Washington, D.C. He is a 3-time recipient of the International Crime Novel of the Year Award and 2-time winner of the Los Angeles Times Book Award. His journalism and fiction have appeared in GQ, Esquire, Mojo, The Times, and The Washington Post. He's also produced several independent films and was the U.S. distributor of John Woo's The Killer. Please welcome George Pelecanos. Our next panelist has been a producer on The Wire for all 3 of its seasons. Her career has touched on many aspects of filmmaking and television, including directing, editing, writing, supervising scripts, and acting. She was post-production supervisor on such films as Summer of Sam, He Got Game, the great cult/mass audience film Ghost Dog: The Way of the Samurai. Please welcome Karen L. Thorson. Our next panelist portrays the callous Deputy Baltimore Police Commissioner William Rawls. He's appeared on numerous TV shows, including Oz, Law & Order, The Sopranos, and NYPD Blue. His feature film credits include City by the Sea, Copland, and Die Hard with a Vengeance. Please welcome John Doman. Our next panelist portrays the brilliant underboss Russell Stringer Bell. He has appeared in numerous TV series in both the U.S. and the U.K., including Soul Food, Law & Order, Absolutely Fabulous, and Dangerfield, and in such feature films as Buffalo Soldiers. He also stars in HBO's highly anticipated new film, Sometimes in April, about the Rwandan genocide. The killing of Stringer Bell was, I think it is safe to say, the least welcome television event since the advent of the Fox News Channel. Please welcome Idris Elba. Our next panelist portrays Sergeant Ellis Carter. He has portrayed Officer Clayton Hughes on Oz and has appeared in such TV series as Law & Order and The Cosby Show. His feature films include Jefferson in Paris and Mad Dog and Glory. The man who yelled, "You do not get to win, shitbirds, we do." Please welcome Seth Gilliam. Our next panelist joined the cast of The Wire in 2004 as the brash young drug dealer Mario Stanfield. It says brash here. Brash to me is Marlo. Marlo I'm racing this because I got caught with the word brash. It's Marlo, yes. Brash to me is like, Eddie Haskell in Leave It to Beaver. I'm talking cold-blooded, cool Marlo Stanfield. He began his career in the 1998 Spike Lee film He Got Game, followed a year later by a role in Jim Jarmusch's Ghost Dog. He's also made guest appearances on such TV shows as Law & Order Special Victims Unit, Third Watch, Law & Order, and The Beat. Please welcome Jamie Hector. I'm going to ask a couple of opening questions, but mostly I want to get to your questions as soon as possible. So,
Before you start,
please,
I just want to acknowledge she won't get up here. She should get up here, but I understand her. Nina Noble, this is my co-executive producer since the going back to the corner, and it all falls apart in a ridiculous heap. Without Nina. She has been my true partner since Jim Finnerty forced us to work together, and he knew what he was doing. So much is on the show. She stays in the background, and we'll just sort of laugh at our answers later. But she's right here.
Watching that first episode, I was struck again by how many laughs there are. I think mostly because a lot of people just love these characters so much, but it also impressed upon me how much as the season progressed, how serious and almost kind of magisterially profound the season became in its depiction of these lives. But I want to begin with a kind of nuts and bolts question to any of the producers. Was there ever actually a strategy of crime containment that we saw this past season, the Hamsterdam Project, where a section of a neighborhood was declared a kind of no arrest, no drug-free, but drug-abundant area?
No.
No. So that was your creation. Good for you. Mr. Simon, no. Could you explain the process, Mr. Simon, of how you... I'm sorry about this. How you determine the overriding themes of this past season, that is the focus on the political machinations of Baltimore and particularly Stringer Bell's move into at least the semi-legitimate business world?
No.
It's going to be one of those nights.
I just had to, I had to try to keep with Ed.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about, I think it's fair to say that early on when the show was first being conceived and before it was cast and before we had started shooting season 1, it was planned that each season would be a separate case involving separate targets. And so the Barksdale storyline could have ended after first season. We saw this wonderful dynamic at the center of the Barksdale story involving Idris and Wood and Larry Gilliard, this wonderful triangulation. And we realized maybe 3 episodes into first season that we could sustain that out to about 3 seasons if we put it on the but at the same time having to put it on the back shelf for season 2 so that we grew the city. So that thing, the idea of third season, some of it has its origins all the way back in first season. The idea of doing political reform, we wanted to add the political component of the city. You sort of have to in order to explain how plausible or implausible or problematic a drug legalization, even a grassroots drug legalization effort would be. You can't have it take place in a political vacuum. And the one thing I always hate about television shows is generally like when they have somebody to come on to basically be the heavy, be it a politician or there's no wit or personality, they're just basically there as a prop. So we didn't want a generic political infrastructure lowering the boom at the end. We needed to create a whole political infrastructure. So that became the new world of season 3, the port or so.
Yeah.
So we don't work from character and go and then try to fashion a story with character. We try to fashion a story and then figure out what we need to build to tell the story. I think that's probably the best way to say it.
In fact, I think I've heard or read that you have a series of themes kind of mapped out almost through 6 seasons with major themes.
5.
5. And what
6th season is lying on a beach.
I see. Okay.
Maybe separate beaches for all of us.
What would the other themes be that you want to address?
Well, listen, if we get a renewal, having, not to get into the themes themselves, but Ed, his 7 years in the school system, has given him a lot of material that I think he'd like to explore. We'd like to look at an inner city school system, and Baltimore's is no less interesting than any other inner city school system, I imagine. And then there's something else there's an idea that I had that I'm still trying to sway Ed on it, but it's something about. Wow, it just feels like I'm getting way out ahead of the show now to even be discussing it.
Okay.
But forgive me. We sort of know how to end the show after 5.
Right.
And we may have to learn how to end it after 3.
Well, we certainly. Well, speaking of authority figures, Mr. Doman, the intro card said callous, but you play, for my money, and you'll excuse my language, the biggest prick on TV. It's nice. It's very, very satisfying to me as a viewer to see that Rawls is this very, oh man, am I in for it? This very complicated mixture of arrogance and unwarranted pride, and possesses great office politics savvy, and is totally unredeemed the way other TV shows would do by having you follow him home and see that he's a generous lover who likes cats. I wonder what you think about your character's motives and what you think about how the character has played out over the seasons.
Well, I don't really think of him as a prick. He knows how to play the game in the system. He's come up through the system, and it's a hardball system. I think I learned a few things about this character this season that I didn't know in the previous season. Which is kind of an interesting thing when you deal with a show that when you get a script, you're only getting 1/12 of the story. Because most of the time, when you get a script for episodic television or for a movie, you get the whole story. So you really know where the characters come from and where he's gone. I learned this season that I may have some underlying reasons for being kind of an egotistical bastard, if you would. If egotism is a reaction to self-loathing, and if my character is all the things I thought he was, dealing with this new issue, this guy would really hate himself inside.
Yeah.
And his egotism and bravura and his nastiness is the surface of that.
I think that's really well put. Mr. Elba, you're a dead man. What did you think when you got that script? and how far in advance did you know? Don't lie now.
Yeah, right. No, I always had an idea that that was going to happen.
Yeah.
David had called me 2 days beforehand. No, I guess David called me like maybe the month before the script was about to be issued, and we had a very quick conversation. And because I guess we all know what was going to happen, and it was very basic conversation that we're about to end that storyline. Mm-hmm. And personally, I was sad to see Stringer, my character, go, because I'd fallen in love with what he had achieved and how the storyline had expanded. But as a fan of the show, and it was the best move, I think, for the TV show, and for just to keep the show interesting, just to keep that unpredictable. Mm-hmm. I felt, and on honesty, I felt that there was a kind of rapidness that happened to his demise. I think that it happened very quickly, and that was my surprise. That was the main thing that I was surprised about, how quickly it happened. But I think it was a good move. It was the best move.
Did you become emotional? Did other people become emotional shooting those scenes?
Yeah, the actual shooting the scenes were emotional, not overly so. But we've all worked really hard on a storyline that should have ended in the first season. Mm-hmm. And we were, this character is a key figure in that storyline, and to see him blasted away like that was, for all of us, everybody, it was hard. It was very hard. There was a scene, I think it was in the 12th episode, where we had this extra who was, he had to zip Stringer Bell up in the body bag. And the poor guy was nervous, he was obviously he was a fan, so he's trembling. Well, the zip wouldn't go up, so I couldn't help it, but I had to go, "What are you doing, bro?" And he jumped out. But even he, as a day player, came on to say he was even emotional about the whole thing. He was like, "Wow, can't believe it." So.
Yeah. I'd like to throw this open to the audience. Does anyone have a question for anyone on the panel? Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah, I guess the microphone will come as quickly as possible. Sure.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Mr. Elba, for existing. And thank you to the casting director for giving us Mr. Elba, and the rest of the cast, but Lord have mercy. Denzel has to watch his back, and I just had to say that. Okay, but I do have a question. It's clear, or it's very noticeable. I was just telling my friend that a lot of the pairings in the storyline are black and white. You have Bunk and McNulty. You have Mr. Doman, Mr. Prick, and the commissioner, or the acting commissioner. But you even have Bubs and his buddy. And I was saying in season 2, the racial dynamic was different because we went to the docks where everyone was primarily white. And there was racism there, but what strikes me is that in my personal experience in the United States, things change based more for me on economics. Like, I've lived in places that are predominantly white, but because you can afford to live there, the dynamic changes. It's almost like, yeah, well, okay, if you can afford to be here, welcome. Is that purposeful? Are you trying to level the field as far as the racial element goes? Are you trying to say something about that things are not necessarily black and white? Oh, you have the deputy commissioner who's a prick, but then you have people like Clay Davis. I'm really interested if when you're casting or when you're writing it, do you write the characters with race in mind, or is it a player thing? Specifically for the Clay Davis character, because he could have been a white jerk as well. But the fact that you made him particularly black, some of the other situations, the characters need to be what they are.
I don't write individual characters with race in mind to begin with. I'm writing characters, and I think that we're all conceiving, the writers get in a room and we're conceiving characters based on what we know of Baltimore. So Clay Davis has his origins in real people. And Deputy Rawls has his origins in some real people, and the commissioner has his origins in real people. Racially, it's reflective of the Baltimore we know. Doesn't mean everything matches up perfectly. It doesn't mean that anybody is this person in Baltimore. Usually people are a composite of 3 or 4 people. But to be specific about Clay Davis, he is a composite of 2 or 3 legislators from West Baltimore, all of whom were African American. So, and in fact, as an homage to one of them, whenever you hear him say partner, whenever he calls people partner, that actually, there's a lot of people in Baltimore who know that our tongue is in our cheek there. So everything is rooted in either a city that Ed and I live in and know to an extent, or in the parts of D.C. that George has covered in his work. That would not be the federal D.C., but the Shaw, Anacostia, Northeast D.C. that Georgia, that part of Washington, and it's rooted in what we know to be sort of credible for the moment. I think there is a lot about. I think you're right. There is an awful lot that is about class rather than race in America, and I think you saw that reflected in the second season. There were black stevedores in that union. There was a racial dynamic to the union. There was also some subtle racism depicted, but there was also a commonality among the stevedores that had nothing to do with race, that had to do with their status in society.
If I could just follow up on that, I wanted to ask Mr. Pelecanos, as a white writer, the challenges that it imposes upon you in writing for black characters. I mean, in your novels, you do this all the time, but I wonder if the context of television makes it any different. Like, do the actors ever say, my character wouldn't say it this way, they'd say like this? Or conversely, do they say, what the hell are you asking me for? Do I know a lot of drug dealers?
Yeah, I think you get both of that, actually.
Yeah.
And we listen to everybody, and we take the input. And it's just a matter of, again, not, never, when you sit down as a writer, never say, well, I'm writing a black guy, he's gonna talk this way. Mm-hmm. It's more about who is this person, and then remember that everybody has a different voice. You're in a room with 20 black people, and you close your eyes, you're not going to hear one voice. You're going to hear 20 different people with 20 different voices, and that's where it breaks down, in my opinion. Usually is, a writer doesn't recognize that, and that's really what you got to get down to when you're writing these shows. No matter what color you are, it's just respect everybody that you're writing about.
We have another question? Yes.
First of all, I'd like to suggest that everybody here and elsewhere write HBO asking that there be another season.
Everybody here has, right?
Well, everybody.
That would account for all of it.
Well, we should all speak to our friends. My question is, have you received feedback from the Baltimore police, either the brass or the rank and file police officers?
I'm going to throw this to Ed because I happen to know from talking to him before, he just sat down with the Baltimore Police Commissioner the other day. Ed, see if you can go past monosyllabic on this one.
I think that the rank and file really enjoy the show. And I think that the brass, the higher up you get, they have a real problem with it. They don't. The flexibility is not there. They can't smile, and they actually see themselves. They think we're mimicking them, which we're not. These characters are our characters, and but the guy on the foot post, the guy in the car, they enjoy it. It's to them it's very real.
There was this Wednesday in the New York Times, you probably saw this front page piece, Baltimore Streets Meaner, but Message is Mixed, which contains this, I think, priceless anecdote from the Health Commissioner who says, Baltimore is actually a very safe city if you're not involved in the drug trade. But it says that the murder rate has steadily increased, and it's this whole piece, and it doesn't mention The Wire in here once.
Thank God.
But it echoes what you said. There's another official's quoted saying, "This is the smallest big city I've ever lived in. Violence is very personal because everyone knows everyone else and is a relative. If you shoot someone, the retribution will be fast and sure." That certainly seems to be something that comes out time and time again in the series.
I don't know, you know, the, what's to say? It's, I think one of the things you see depicted in the show is that there is this, this almost layered disconnect between the two Americas. And there's this entire underground economy in West Baltimore that mirrors the downtown economy. And I think that's reflected in the murder statistics. I mean, I remember when I was a police reporter one time, I actually compared by race, you know, the victims of homicides for the first half of the year, and found that your chance of being a victim of homicide if you were African American in Baltimore was, you know, off the charts. And your chance of being a victim of homicide if you were white in Baltimore was about the same as if you were living in Omaha, Nebraska, statistically. Wow. So there's something very disturbing about that. It is, and I think one of the things that's powerful about The Wire is that the two Americas are sort of scratching up against each other in a variety of storylines, and it's the whole schematic of the city, or at least it is after 3 seasons. And you know, if we are able to do it for longer, I think we'll even add more to that city. But I mean, there is a disconnect there.
Yeah. Have another question? Way in the back, up there, in the middle. I'm sorry to make it as hard as possible for the person with the microphone.
Thank you. Oh. I have a question, but before I ask my question, I want to say that I learned a great lesson from The Wire, which was during season 2, I was working in an Avid editing suite next to Karen, and I'm wondering why the hell I didn't give her my resume then. So, but my question is there a moment for David and Ed where you realize how difficult it is for all the elements to come together to make something sort of special? Was there a moment in this series where you realized it was going to be what it was?
Well, I think you start off, we don't do all the scripts like we should. And it's kind of dicey. And long about episode 7, you get a feeling. And this year, because of where we were going, you had an incredible feeling that this was going to be really great. 2 superb actors banging heads against each other. It was just...
Talking about Wood and Idris.
Of course I'm talking about Wood and
I'm
Idris.
just saying, you know, they brought it. I mean, definitely brought it.
They brought it. It was just incredible.
I want to ask a question of Mr. Gilliam. Your character conveys, I think, some of the rare idealism in this show, in the sense that Ellis hasn't been completely ground down by the police bureaucracy or by the exhausting ambivalence of a black man like Carter that he must feel as a cop and as someone who's putting mostly black people in jail. And this season especially, we saw that you were kind of taken with the concept of Amsterdam, unlike your partner, and that you were more open-minded. What did you think of how your character developed this year?
I was excited by it. I was excited by the new direction he seemed to be going in, the awareness that he seemed to have a little bit more self-awareness and a little bit more patience with himself to learn this past season, which was pretty exciting to me. I was starting to be afraid that I was, you know, the trap is in trying to make someone a 3-dimensional person when all you get to do is really curse and berate people. Right. I was afraid that it was be very easy to fall into a trap of just approaching every scene with that level of, you know, kind of manic energy, and trying to find the human being behind it, or to maintain the human being behind it, not to become a caricature of what I had done the first season. So it was pretty exciting for me this past season. You know, I got to say more, I got to do more, I got to work more. It was cool.
And it really showed. Yes.
Of course, now your partner's on my ass.
I'd kind of like to respond to one of the earlier remarks that was made by the sister in the middle here and tie it in with what this gentleman behind me said. I had the good fortune or bad fortune to work as a criminal defense attorney for 14 years in Detroit, which is very similar to Baltimore. And I think that you have done a remarkable job in capturing the reality of what goes on. The first season dealt primarily with narcotics. I was still living in Detroit then. And I used to watch the show with narcotics officers against whom I butted heads in court. But we hung out together. We shot pool, we drank, we rode on the boats on the Detroit River. And we all agreed that it was very, very realistic. And I'd like to tip my hat to the actors as well as to the writers for capturing it accurately. Thank you. However, I do wonder at times about the short shrift that is given to the legal side of things. I don't know why that is. I'm not sure if it's just because it's not as sexy, as juicy as some of the other aspects of things. But there was one particular scene when D'Angelo was being cross-examined. Well, he was being interrogated at the precinct, and he was with counsel, who was a black woman. So, of course, I was watching very closely because I thought it could have been me. And when she was shown photographs of dead bodies, she kept pushing the photographs away or trying to turn them over. And the reason why I think that gave her and us short shrift is because I see autopsy photos. I've seen soupy bodies that were in the trunks of cars for the whole summer. And I just felt that was the one thing that I thought was glaringly unrealistic. You do develop a certain hardness that you have to have if you're going to represent your clients adequately. And I'm just asking that you consider in the future that you consider perhaps talking with people who actually do that for a living and perhaps consult with them. And everything else is so on point.
Point noted.
Thank you.
In our defense, I'll only say there's a little bit of the. Did you ever see Shakespeare in Love? Did you see the movie? There's a little bit of. It's a play about a nurse in there because that scene, of course, is about. That's the long interrogation scene that culminated the first season, and it's a play about D'Angelo coming to terms with the damage done and with his role in it and with his standing in society as a whole and where there is left for him to stand. So in a sense, there was a lot of movement of those photographs in the scene. It was all very choreographed, that the detectives keep pushing Wallace and pushing the other into his face, and he's being forced to look at the cost, and we needed and wanted as part of the sort of psychic journey of that scene for everybody his own lawyer to display without saying a word his sense of being outside of her, being outside the human condition as the murders mounted, as the rate of violence became apparent. Yes, there are probably an awful lot of lawyers that would not have had that moment. We just decided the scene would work better if one did there for D'Angelo, for the purpose of him that was the moment where he accepts personal guilt for everything he's done. And that's the most important thing about the scene. So,
wasn't it? Correct me if I'm wrong, but also I think wasn't she from out of town, and that was part of like she wasn't even
right,
from
she was
Baltimore.
Kansas.
She wasn't even used to it.
She was new. She was a new public defender. They brought her in.
She wasn't from Detroit. I mean,
No.
Yes. Please keep your hand up. Yes, great.
Thank you. This is to everyone. Anyone can answer this.
Everyone will.
All right, all right. Besides being an excellent human drama that is quite thought-provoking and gives us a lot to talk about either right after the show or the next day, what messages do you want to either convey to individuals or possibly society? What do you want people to take away from it, actors, producers, writers?
Jamie?
Let's make Jamie answer.
You're the best.
Oh, yeah. Caught me off guard. Yeah, well, you know, that is that it can be done as far as like the realism of the show, that everybody has to have a hand in something. Like, I mean, when I watched The Wire, I noticed that it's the most real show on television, right? And you actually have to dive in and be hands-on with everything that you do. For instance, I work with kids. And when I was watching it and I saw all those kids out there at Amsterdam, it's like, why weren't they in school? You know, so if it's hands-on and everybody actually takes time out of their lives and just reach and grab a kid and be a mentor or something, like, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people up here do that, because in Baltimore, we were running around the schools over there also, giving back. I think that's what the show actually does for me. And that's what I would like everybody to see, like, you know, take time out and recognize the kids that are just out there running around, you know? Yeah.
Could I ask you, how do you work with in what capacity do you work with kids?
I teach martial arts and drama, and I also counsel. And I mentor kids also. Like, I pop up at them in school, in junior high schools and high schools, just to make sure that they're on point. Yeah.
That's great. And yeah, what do they think about? That's a good question. What do they think about your character?
Well, I make sure that they know that it's television. Because, I mean, a lot of people really take it to heart, as though, you know, this is really me. But, I mean, they love it. They love the show. And I'm also asking them, like, what are you doing up at night watching this?
Right.
Watching the show. But, you know, they love the character, and they understand it. You know, it pushes them to want to act also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you feel coming into the show this season and making your presence felt? Because you really did, in a real,
thank you,
strong way. But I just wonder how it feels to join an ensemble like that.
I felt welcomed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I felt great.
That's good. Yes. I think it's coming.
Hi. I'd like to know why you changed the opening theme song from the Tom Waits version to the Neville Brothers version.
We changed it after the first year because we were going to a different part of the city to tell a different story, and it felt like that we needed to capture the voice of that part of the city. It was a way of saying that while the show and its elemental purpose remained the same, the story was going to be different. And that we did it again for the third season. And you know, if we get a fourth, we'll change it again for the fourth.
Who's going to do it for the fourth?
No, I don't
No
know.
Christina Aguilera, okay? Yes. This gentleman with the hat.
Hi. At the beginning of season 3 on the HBO boards and everything, they said about like the murderer's row of crime novelists for season 3, George, Richard Price. And I guess, David, you said that the writing for season 3 was sort of like an experiment, how you'd break it up 2, 1 for Raphael, and so on. Did it work? Did the experiment work in terms of writing?
Well, we're all alive. We're all still talking to each other. Listen,
not really.
The writers. Idris, it's a bad thing, but the writers never die. This is a very hard show to not... The writing is the easy part, and it's not easy. The hard part of this show is getting us all in a room and arguing down. It's like boiling it down until we have what we want. And it doesn't happen. It happens in fits and starts. You know, I think, you know, if Ed could have his way, we would be in that room until everything was perfect. And you know, there are times where he probably feels that if it were up to me, I would never go in that room. But and then you know, introducing other voices. I mean, the core voices are the three here. But then on their episodes, you know, Price was weighing in, Lahane is weighing in, and it's a lot of, you know, it's very funny because there's a lot of pride in that. There's a lot of, you know, there's a lot to be argued out. There's a lot to be heard, and there's a lot of, you know, great swirling balls of flame have to go flying back and forth, and sometimes innocent bystanders are killed. And, but eventually, that's what makes it good. I mean, that's, you know, the thing does not have the fragility, the looseness of being, you know, one guy's idea. I don't think all of this can come out of one person's imagination. It has to come out of this sort of back and forth, and that I would almost say that, in a way, this season was more leavened than the previous two by the extra voices. So yeah, I think it worked. I mean, we're going to try it again if we get a chance.
Who was in control? Like, you know what I mean? Ed or David? In terms of like, who made sure where you wanted the story to go by episode 12 wound up there?
It's David's show. I mean, you know, ultimately, well, I mean, that's the answer, really.
You kind of jumped on, like, producing and stuff like that, so.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm speaking for myself. I feel like, you know, I'm trying to write in the voice of him. He created the show and the characters initially and that sort of thing. So ultimately, the decision, but we have a lot of arguments, man.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's my show. I would say that I'm the sort of court of last resort. When a decision finally has to get made, I sort of, but at the same time, I mean, the ultimate, the double twist at the end of the season with both Barksdale and Bell, the dual betrayal, that was Ed, and that was his construct, and down to the very last lines of the of Bubbles talking over his shoulder to Major Colvin about Amsterdam. Those were Ed's lines. So, in a way, it's, you know, nobody gets all the pie is the best way to say it. But yeah, there is, you know, what I'm doing is sort of trying to take that last final pass over all the logic so that it all makes sense. You know, and sometimes I get it right, and you know.
But also, don't you sometimes discover things as you go along in terms of, by 12 you want to hit a certain mark, but what you see on the screen, what the actor brings,
Right.
elements in current events, what's going on in the city,
That's
contribute
right. The dailies,
to...
not so much the current events part, but the dailies are biofeedback, and you see what actors are doing, and you see what dynamic is working or not working, and you might adjust. But in some ways, this show's more locked into what we decide we're going to do than others that I've worked on, where all the episodes are separate. You know, on another, you know, when I worked on Homicide, if something wasn't working, we just dropped it and went on to something else. And here, you're in for the 12 hours, no matter what you do. You might be able to adjust within that. But we often argue for, you know, certain things we start to discover as a result of the writing, and a plot line can change. Usually the outcome can't.
Yeah, I think what we do, though, David sort of gives us this arc. This year was reform. So if you have reform as the idea, everybody stays within that. That sort of controls it. If it goes too far away from the reform idea, we have to bring it back. So it's sort of the arc that's really most important for us.
Yeah, if I could follow up on what you said about the end of the season, it season ended to me as though it could be the end, that you wrapped up some storylines, you know, sent McNulty back onto the streets pretty happily. But were you writing it as though this could conceivably be the end of the series?
I think the end of every season could be the end of the series, and I think they've all been, you know, I mean, I think all of us are determined to deliver each season as if it was a standalone work. So, and I think they all, I mean, if we'd ended after first season, it would have made sense. And if we'd ended after second season, it would have made sense.
And really, what is HBO saying to you about the show's future?
Ball's in my court, actually. I went out there for a meeting, and to their great credit, it was not about viewership, although that's all the talk, sort of that's all the chatter in the newspapers. The show is not a breakout hit, but the numbers are, by HBO standards, pretty respectable. And our numbers were down this year, but nobody sort of knows the inside joke of that, which is that HBO counts their, well, not HBO, the Nielsen's now count HBO differently. You used to get credit for everything that was on HBO 2, 3, 4, Spanish, whatever was on any HBO channel was credited to what was on HBO 1. Well, if you're The Sopranos and you have 10 million viewers, just to throw a number, and 900,000 of them are watching the movie on HBO 2, it's only it's less than a 10% drop to lose those as the numbers are recalculated. But if you're The Wire and 3 million people are watching you, but really only 900, only 2.1 are, it's a 33% drop. So you see that, I mean, we probably never were drawing the numbers that were presumed upon us in the first 2 seasons. So by that standard, by the standard of the DVDs are selling really well, it's not really about that. And that's to HBO's great credit, is numbers don't scare them in that sense. The meetings really are about, okay, you've ended the storyline that motivated this show for 2 years, 2.5 if you want to count the middle of season 2. What's left to say? And so the discussion with Chris Albrecht and Carolyn Strauss was really about story, which I'd rather be discussing story with a network than be discussing, are you going to make it prettier? Are you going to, I mean, all the stuff that comes up in a network show. So I regard the process as very healthy. And, I was talking, I was also listening. Some stuff came back, and now I'm trying to detail the storylines out to the end of not just the end of what would be season 4, but to the end of the show. And have a discussion about what the remaining arc is and why we should do it. And so the ball's, and I'm doing that kind of like, I don't know, you ever seen like Nomar Garciaparra taking at bat? I'm like adjusting my gloves. I mean, it's like you only get one shot. I'm trying to do it as best I can. So
right.
I expect to get something out to them soon. But the ball's in my court. They're not hesitating. I am at this point.
And do you have a deadline or a self-imposed deadline?
Yeah. It was. I shouldn't be here now. No.
Could we help you along in this decision at all?
No. Listen, I mean, if it was a matter of if I thought I could just throw anything up there and get the I would have done it already.
Right.
But there's no immediate need. But I would like to have a decision. I'd like to do something get something to them by the end of the month.
Way in the back on the right, to my right. Yes. I have to wrap up. Okay.
You might be the last. Make it good.
I'm a boxing writer, and I was interested in the character Cuddy. How did you develop him to become a boxing coach? Why did you choose boxing for an inner city sport? Because it's the only sport that really is introduced on the show. And as far as if the show comes back, will his character be have a more integral role or integral part?
Go ahead, George. Cuddy was, I'd written a book that hasn't even come out yet, but it was about a guy coming out of prison, and I had a lot of material when I was done that I didn't use in the book, and it played to the theme of reform that we were doing, to have a character like that introduced. And then, Baltimore is a big city for that. There's a lot of boxing rings, still the old-time boxing rings, and where you go into these places and you see that there's a lot of men and women that are really trying to help these kids and through sports, like Jamie, except many more years ago. I used to teach kids martial arts a long time ago. And I knew something about it and working with kids and that sort of thing. So, you use everything. You use everything you can use. And then when we got in these places, it was just remarkable, you didn't have to build a set or anything. It was all there, and these people were all there. And if you look at the show, in these, what are some of the names of these?
CCO.
CCO.
Mac Lewis.
Mac Lewis's gym. I mean, these are all real people that are working with kids in the city, and it just really fit in right in for the theme of the show.
Do we have time for one more? One more question. One quick question. Just right in the front.
Thanks. I came across the book Homicide in a used bookstore years ago, and it's one of my favorite pieces of journalism. I mean, what a commitment to the job and to be there and to put the time in. I'm just wondering, that work of true life writing and true life experience by a person has spawned so many fictional extrapolations. But I'm just wondering, does it ever get strange, or does it, I mean, how does one react? Like when you're talking about being zipped up in a body bag, you were seeing this happen, and these were real people, and you were dealing with police and also the other side of it. I'm just wondering, I know you're doing good work, and I think that's great, but has it been strange? Are there anything you can talk about?
Everything's been strange. That they let me in that homicide unit was strange years ago.
Was it?
Because
Ed was one of 3 detectives who voted to let me in the unit. The other 33 said no. Shows you it's not a democracy. Listen, it's been the fact that I'm doing television is strange. I'm not supposed to be doing, look at the 3 people who are running this show in terms of the writing staff. George actually has some film history, but he's a novelist with, this is not his day job. And Ed Burns, was a homicide detective doing these kind of wiretap cases, and then a school teacher. And I'm supposed to be on the obit desk of the Baltimore Sun bumming cigarettes from younger reporters. A lot of serendipitous things happened along the way, and it's all been strange. And I'm not going to claim that I bleed every time. I didn't do it then, and you don't. Just like, I guess, the detectives or anybody else that is sort of encountering these problems on a day-to-day level, you absorb this stuff. You may have some feeling of sadness about the totality of events. Certain things may strike you, but everything is just work to them. And after a while, if you're a journalist, it's work to you. And I don't want to sort of pretend to some sort of grandiose emotion that sort of gets worn away after, certainly when I was first a police reporter, and the first time you go out and see something like that, your jaw gets slack. But I want to say one other thing, because not all of our cast here, but this is a very tough show to be an actor on, because as John pointed out, you don't know what's coming. You sort of have to trust that the writers have a plan. And that they're doing everything by degrees, and whereas in a movie, the arc is there within 2 hours, and you get to play all the character changes within 2 hours. Everything has to be graded over 36 or 48 or 60 episodes. So characters take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And, this night McNulty won't drink. This night, but then he goes out and gets blotto again. And so forth. And it's a very, when you have a palette this, that's a bad metaphor, but when you have this many characters and you've created something that is basically a city, in a schematic of a city, not everybody works all the time, and so you sort of have to be on when you're on, the characters need, we are, as writers, sort of blessed with, you just go deeper and deeper in the cast. And there's just such, I'm so proud of how well we cast this show, I have to say. I gotta credit.
I think with that, we should probably conclude I want to thank everybody. My final plea to the producers is please don't ever let any harm come to Bubbles. I always think seriously that there, but for the grace of God, I could be pushing a shopping cart, selling T-shirts, and looking for my next fix. Thank you very much.
But with pants. With our pants.